Ready? It's that time. Welcome, race fans, to the last pre St. Pete new player onboarding show for the Grid Rival app. If you're here, it's likely because it's your first time playing our league's game. We're glad to have you. Before we get started, some quick introductions. My name is Ross. I'm the founder and CEO of Grid Rival. With me today, I have Michael Ursinoli, our Chief Technology Officer, William Laddie, one of our principal software engineers, and Ryan Booth, our Director of Business Operations. All people that claim to be experts on how to play this game and help you have the best experience as a first time player. Today, we are going to be covering questions about gameplay, game mechanics, how the game works, how fantasy points work, and we're going to be framing this all up in frequently asked questions and in some of the top mistakes that we see players make, new players specifically. And then we will go into Q&A format. We answer questions in the order in which they come in. So if you have questions, we encourage you to start getting them into the chat as soon as possible. And before I get going, we are pleased to announce, and if you're on this call, you probably already know that Grid Rival is the official fantasy game for IndyCar this year, powered by Firestone. So, as a quick reminder, the IndyCar Fantasy Challenge powered by Firestone. To participate, all you have to do is join any IndyCar league, whether it's a league that you create and have your friends join, or a league that you've joined of your friends, or one of the main larger leagues, like the IndyCar official league on Grid Rival. Any IndyCar league you join will automatically enter your team within that league in the Firestone Challenge. You can create multiple entries into the Firestone Challenge if you would like. Only one of them is eligible to win. The winner of that game will receive a 2026 VIP experience, the Indy 500. So lots of exciting stuff and prizes on the line. Let's get into the heart of the discussion. We want to get to your Q&A as quickly as possible. We're going to start and have started these last couple shows out with the top 7 mistakes, most common mistakes that we see new players making. Number 1, not watching the game guide. So we've created 4 very easily digestible 60 to 90-second videos that can be found once you are in your league by clicking the little gear icon in the top right, or by clicking on the My Team screen before the first race. There's a banner that says View the Game Guide. Go through those videos, watch them, learn them, and you will also find that we have a support.gridrival.com page that has a lot more detail for those of you who said or view the game guides and say, hey, I still want to know more. I want to go deeper. You can go pretty deep. We have a lot of information at support@gridrival.com. So number 1 mistake is not watching the game guide. Watch the videos. Number 2 is failing to understand that one of the most important aspects strategically of this game is increasing your fantasy team's value over the course of the season. And because that's the most important, we're actually going to save that one kind of for the end, because it is actually, no, we're going to save contract lengths for the end. We're going to go over this one right now. Gaining team value. We probably all know, if we've ever done fantasy before, is the way that you are going to win and beat the competitors in your league is by earning the most fantasy points. The way you're going to earn the most fantasy points is by having the most stacked or accurate driver lineup on your team. And the way that you're going to do that, at least on this app, is by having the most amount of money to spend. And since everybody starts the season with $100 million in fantasy budget, the question you might have, and one of the most common ones we get, is how do I earn more money? And the way that you do that, and this is what we'll go into in a little bit more detail, is by signing drivers and hoping that they go up in value during the course of the time when you're on your team. So let's give an example. We're going into St. Pete. Let's say you add Nolan Siegel to your team. I think he's currently $7.5 million. Is that right? Something like that.
Right around there.
Let's say he's 7.5. If you sign him to your team for 3 races and he crushes it over the next 3 races, it is very likely that his value is going to go from 7.5 to maybe it goes to 10. If that happens, that gap between 7.5 and 10 gets added to your team's value when he is released from your team. So you have that much more money to spend. Doing that over the course of the season, you're going to see people in IndyCar leagues probably with team values of 120, 130 million or more by the end of the season. So this game really, really comes down to finding value in drivers, finding drivers that you think are undervalued and riding their price as it goes up and hoping that when they're released from your team or when you release them early and pay a fee that you gain cash as you do it. So we're gonna spend the majority of time talking about contract lengths, how contract lengths work, how to think about that piece of it here at the end. So number two, failing to understand that the importance of the game is about gaining money, as it's equally as important to earning fantasy points. Um, Number three is fantasy points are not only equal to race position. This is a really big one. So one of the things that we've worked really, really hard at Grid Rival is making a game that can be enjoyed by everybody, meaning you don't have to obsess over the numbers and all the data at the depth that we're going to be talking about in this call to have fun, right? You can just pick the drivers that you think are going to do best and still have a really fun time. It's going to be social. There's going to be camaraderie and community that's created with your friends in your leagues. But we also wanted to create a game that has enough depth to where some of the people, probably most likely the people who are on this call, can really, really dig in and analyze and create spreadsheets and do all the different things you want. So one of the things we knew in creating that, and from our experience, is that if we had a game that was just based off race finish position, it probably wouldn't be that fun very long term. And if there's any fantasy football players in here or done fantasy sports for other sports, you kind of experienced that, right? If the only thing that fantasy football was based off of was which team won a game, I don't think that many people would play it, right? There's how many rushing yards were there, how many passing yards, tons and tons of ways in which fantasy points are earned, and we wanted to create a similar experience with racing. So although race finish position is the most heavily weighted thing in which fantasy points are earned, there's a lot of other things you need to pay attention to. Qualifying position, depending on the type of league, right? Whether it's Formula One, NASCAR, IndyCar, there's some nuance, but some of the other things that exist are net overtakes. So the difference between the driver's qualifying position and their finish position, laps led, right? How many laps have they led compared to some of their teammates? Did they beat their teammate in Formula One? It's directly, right? Did they beat the other driver on their team? In IndyCar, they get points if they were the highest finisher on their team. So there's a lot of different ways in which fantasy points can be earned, and it's really important to remember that race finish position is not the only one. Number four is something that we call the one race rule. This is going to come up a little bit, probably quite a bit more on this call in terms of thinking about contract terms and contract lengths. But the one race rule is just a cool down period after any driver gets released from your team where you cannot pick them back up for one event. So let's say you sign a driver to your team for a 4 race contract and they get removed from your team, you won't be able to sign them again until the 6th race of the season if we're talking about the start of the season. So we'll probably get a little bit more into the one race rule, but it's just something that we see people, especially new players, learning a little bit the hard way sometimes 3, 4, 5 races into the season. Number 5 is not selecting a talent driver. A talent driver is any driver on Grid Rival under $18 million in value that will earn you double points. You have to have a full roster to be able to utilize a talent driver, meaning you have to have all 6 driver positions filled, or in the case of Formula One, all 5 drivers and 1 constructor. A lot of times we will see people doing things like, instead of having all 6 spots filled, they'll try and fill 5 and stack the top 3 or 4 with really expensive drivers, thinking that that will be a strategy that will make them more points. We're not, just for the sake of time, we're not going to go into why that's a bad idea. It's just a really bad idea. Don't do it. Utilize a talent driver. The other things that you should know about a talent driver is that, unlike some of your drivers, you can change your talent driver every race. So it doesn't stick to a contract. And sometimes that means that if you have a driver that's right underneath the threshold, I forget in IndyCar who's right underneath the threshold, but there's a driver that's, I think right now 17.1 million. If his next event is really good and he goes above 18 million, he will automatically be removed as a talent driver from your roster. You have to find somebody else. The inverse is also true. If a driver right now is priced at 18 and a half, they're not eligible and their next race is poor, they could possibly drop into talent driver territory where you can select them to earn double points on your roster. Number 6, before we get into contract lengths, is a lot of times we see people not realize that you can change your lineup, any open position on your lineup, meaning that the driver's contract has not locked, which happens at the start of the first event. Any open positions on your team, you can change as much as you want. So that means preseason, every position, all 6 positions, if we're talking about IndyCar, are wide open. You can change them as much as you want. Once you select and add someone to your team, it doesn't mean they're locked until the first event, at which point they will be locked. And it's very obvious on your My Team screen. There'll be a little lock icon next to the ones that are locked up. So that's like the biggest kind of mistakes that we see people making. We're going to get now into contract length. So the kind of one of the really big mistakes that we see new players make is signing all the same length contracts. Excuse me. If you go look at your My Team screen right now in one of your leagues, and you have 6 drivers on there, and every one of them has a 3-race contract or a 4-race contract, this is who we're talking to. When you're thinking about contracts, there are a lot of different things that you need to consider when you're talking about different lengths. And I'm going to use my team here to go over some of these. The first one is you want to be able to leave options open. Which one of you guys wants to take that one? Any of you? William, Ryan?
I like I like taking the options part of it, because it's kind of how, like, the most important thing in my mind is playing this game is having flexibility and having options based on, depending on the track type, just which drivers are in form, etc. If you have all of the same contract lengths, you're going to have races where the only way to change your lineup for that race is paying a penalty fee for a release. Or you're going to have a ton of players or a ton of drivers rolling off all at the same time, and you're going to need to fill 5 or 6 spots of a pool of 20 to 30 drivers, where you'll have 5 or 6 locked out, which is not ideal by any means at all. And just being able to have that flexibility on a week in, week out basis is going to really set yourself apart from your league mates, and you never want to get stuck in a corner.
Yes, well said. Another reason to think about contract lengths and varying the different lengths of contracts is different types of races, especially in IndyCar and NASCAR. William, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So, IndyCar races on street courses. In fact, they're going to start on a street course. They race on permanent road courses. They race on ovals, small ones, big ones, and different drivers, different teams are going to perform at different levels on these types of tracks. Like, there are some guys who you really want on an oval, maybe not so much on a street course. And then you've got some guys who have never raced on an oval in their life, and you probably want them when they're turning right instead of just left. So, plan accordingly. So you pick those contract lengths so that you have the right drivers available at the right time. For example, if you sign somebody for 5 races in IndyCar, you're not going to have them available for the Indy 500. That's the 6th race. They're going to be on that 1 race cool down that we talked about a little bit earlier. If you want somebody available for Indy, just keep that in mind. So you have to, make sure that they're available, and go from there.
So, in other words, if you want Joseph Newgarden on your team for the Indy 500, make sure that he is not on your team right now on a 5-race contract, because that means he will drop off the race before and he will be locked for the Indy 500 as a great example.
Actually,
Um,
this week is almost a perfect example looking at NASCAR to prove that point.
yeah.
They're headed to Dakota, and Shane Van Gisbergen is the race favorite. He will not be the race favorite anywhere else until the next road course. So he's going to be a guy that you want to look at. So you see that in all the sports, but NASCAR especially.
And then last thing to think about, which I will give this to you, Michael, is thinking about when you're thinking about contract length, you want to think about potentially how undervalued a driver is.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about contract lengths, one of the top things I look for is value or consistency. So in the example of IndyCar, I'm looking at the drivers right now who are available, who I think are underpriced, and I want to ride that value wave up on that contract throughout the engagement of having them. So an example I've been using in the live stream right now is Nolan Siegel. So Nolan Siegel is currently the lowest priced McLaren driver, and early signs are showing that he's very, very likely able to catch up to his teammates. So right now, Nolan's at 7.6 million. Signing him to a 5 race contract could very well see pretty significant gain in your in your contract value of Nolan. And then the trade off would be not having Nolan available for the Indy 500, right? Which as a rookie, no disrespect to Nolan, that might be a plan that you have. You know, it's a plan that I might deploy. So that's what I'm looking for. The F1 example for the F1 people in the group right now would be, you know, it was always a pretty safe bet to put Max on a 5 race contract just because of the consistency that you were pretty much guaranteed to get those points race after race. So putting him on 5 race contracts, taking him off for one, putting him back on for another 5 was a completely acceptable strategy. That's uncommon, but happens.
Yeah, well said. So that sums up kind of the top 7 mistakes that we see people make. We are now going to go into Q&A. So if you do have questions, go ahead and start typing them in. We'll start at the top. Zach Sermon said, "Is Max's contract value 30 million?" Not totally sure
Is
what
the
that.
I think is the max contract value 30 million?
Oh yeah,
And the answer is no. So the hypothetical maximum is higher. How high depends on what sport it is. Like NASCAR is something like 40 million, but it'll never ever get there uh, unless somebody has a 1998 Jeff Gordon season, which that doesn't happen these days. Um, F1 and IndyCar, it's somewhere in the mid 30s, as I recall. You can find all the details if you go to league settings, if you go to the game rules. Like we explain all the scoring, the value changes there. So right now, our highest price is 30 million, but theoretically, it could go up if that driver has a really great day. That said, you could start from pole and you could win the race and not score the most fantasy points. And those
yeah.
value changes are based on fantasy points. Keep that in mind as well.
Which is a great callback to one of the points I made, which again is fantasy points are not just equal to race position. So if you took a driver, let's use this example of Nolan Siegel that Mike gave. Let's say at St. Pete he qualifies 15th, but like he ends up podiuming. You know, he's going to have a ton of overtake points. He's going to have a ton of improvement points. And I think that most of us would agree that a driver like Nolan qualifying 15th and podium in third place might be more of an accomplishment than someone like Alex Palou finishing in first, right? Where he's the best car, best team, or whatever, or however you want to argue that. And so it's actually possible, or I would say it's very difficult for a driver starting the season at 30 million to gain value. For them to go up in value, it means they need to finish the first race first place in fantasy points. So something to consider there. And to William's point, we expose our entire salary value fluctuation, which you can see in your league settings. If you want to understand the exact math for how we fluctuate driver salaries from race to race, the entire formula can be viewed. And there's even examples of it for those of you that want to kind of really dive deep into understanding how contracts change in value from event to event.
And to see that, open the league, press the gear icon, press scoring. You'll have the entire breakout of how drivers and constructors in F1 score points, what points are eligible. Then the tab next to it in the app says salaries. That is the exact math of how contract values fluctuate between race and race.
Jamie B said, will picks always close after qualifying and just before the race? When you say picks, I'm assuming you're talking about picks within your IndyCar league and not our picks game, because the answers are maybe a little bit different. But for context, IndyCar leagues will lock a couple minutes before the green flag. In every league, there's a countdown timer, which up until 24 hours before the event lists the start time, and then once you're within a 24-hour window, it actually turns into a countdown timer, so you can see the exact time when the leagues will lock.
Yeah.
I think that
So IndyCar and NASCAR will always lock for leagues shortly before the start of the race. For F1, it will lock on a sprint weekend. It'll lock before sprint qualifying. or at the start of sprint qualifying rather. And for the non-sprint weekends, it will lock at the start of qualifying. And so that's what the league games do. The pick game locks basically when we lock it. Usually, when cars are on track, is when it'll lock, or if we otherwise decide to lock it for some reason.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
Jesus
again,
asked, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say on the if you're talking about the picks game itself, if cars are on track, there'll be a notice that like the cars are on track, and that's why the picks are not available at that time. If the picks are just not available, maybe some news just broke and things are being adjusted. So, but they'll always come back.
Yeah, for example, like leading into an IndyCar race, if they have a practice session, picks will be paused for that, and they'll reopen shortly after the session ends. And while we're talking about biggest mistakes, not setting your lineup before lockdown is probably the number one mistake you can make. So just make sure you're aware, check out the countdown timer, and make sure you've got that full lineup and a talent driver selected.
Jesus asked, in your app, can you bet on F1? We are not a sports betting app, but in 25 states, the United States, we do have what is called daily fantasy sports game where you can make better or worse or head-to-head matchup predictions. The more you make and get right, the more your money you get. So if you make 2 picks and you get them both right, you can win 3 times your money on any entry. All the way up to 8 picks will get you 100 times your money. So there is the opportunity to play real money games for Formula One and for 6 other sports. We have all 3 NASCAR series. We have IndyCar, we have MotoGP, and Formula E, and we'll hopefully be adding more and more. Ben, very excited to try Grid Rival this year to enhance my IndyCar watching experience. I don't really have a good idea for strategy, but it's going to be fun. We hope so as well. Thanks, Ben. Let's see. Mark Zuckerberg is on the call today. What is the bonus point award quantity if you have a completely French-free season?
Yeah, so like for IndyCar, it's going to be quite easy. As far as I know, there are no French drivers this season. Grosjean doesn't have a seat, sadly, and neither does Pourchaire. So I think we're all going to have a French-free season unless the grid changes. We don't have bonus points for that though in any of our sports. Like as a rule, avoiding Alpine might be a good idea on the F1 side, just because those cars aren't very fast.
And Ocon hasn't looked great either in testing.
Yeah, but no bonus points.
Jacob asked or said, I'm having trouble because Indiana isn't allowing me to play your real money game. Just so everybody knows, the game we are here talking about today, our fantasy league game, is free to play. It is available in every square inch of our globe. You can play it anywhere in the world. It doesn't need to be licensed. If you live in Indiana, you will not be eligible to play our picks game. We are working on that. Indiana is one of the most expensive, strict gaming states to have a daily fantasy sports license in. So it's something we are investigating at the moment and hope to be live there as soon as we can with that product. But if you're trying to get into a league, in an IndyCar league, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It's free to play, and you shouldn't have any restrictions. Kyle Richardson, how is the 500 going to be handled? Will qualifying be a separate race?
It's going to be handled like any other race. We're not going to do anything special for Indy 500 qualifying. I know past iterations of the game have done that. We're not doing that this year. No qualifying points for any of the 17 IndyCar races this year. And we'll lock shortly before the start of Indy 500, just like any other race. So you will know the qualifying results, and you'll know who the odd driver or drivers out are who failed to qualify, and you'll be able to set your lineup accordingly.
Yes. We love every single IndyCar race equally.
That's right. Let's see. Can you change contract lengths between races? Matthew, great question. You cannot. Once a contract is locked, and that happens at lockdown on the first event on a driver's contract. So like we're going to the first race, all of your contracts will lock officially at the green flag of the first lockdown of the season. So you cannot change the contract lengths between races, but you can end a contract early and pay an early release fee. And that is something that I would call maybe an advanced strategy, um, and something we definitely encourage to utilizing if you feel like you've made a wrong decision. Right? Don't necessarily write it out. If you end up signing a driver for 5 races because you think he's way undervalued, but then after the first race on that contract, you kind of think that you maybe made a poor decision, pay the 3% early release fee and get him off your team. So that is something that you can do.
And it's worth noting if you just put someone on your team and they haven't run a race for you yet, say it's Wednesday and you have an open slot and you throw Colton Herta in there for a 3-race contract, up until he locks down, you can change it, be like, oh, I changed my mind. I want him for 1 or I want him for 5. You can always edit contracts. Excuse me. You can also add and drop as many times as you want before a driver has run a race for you.
Mm-hmm. Jamie, where can I get one of your sweet Grid Rival hats? This has been asked on every single show, so we're getting more and more compelled to put up a merch shop on the app. Right now, we don't have any for sale. Right now, we actually don't have any at all. I don't think. I think we're fresh. I don't even have any.
I
new
have
ones.
3 in my closet.
There you go.
Those are the last 3 Grid Rival hats in existence.
Your quarter.
Yep. So made a small batch initially, and I think we're getting more and more interest in people wanting to wear them. So, where can I see the IndyCar points breakdown? Michael, you want to take that?
Open the league, gear icon, scoring. That's where you find all the points breakout for the finish positions for the race and all the bonus points. Click salaries to the right of that, and that will show you how their contract value will change from race to race.
There you go. Let's see. By the way, almost to the bottom of the question feed. So if anyone has questions, get them in. For the one race cooldown, only when 5 races in a row or 5 races total.
Anytime a driver's contract ends or you drop it, that 1 race cooldown applies. So if you sign them for a 1 race contract, they're going to be out the next race. If you sign them for a 5 race contract, they're out on the 6th race. If you sign them for a 4 race contract and you cut them after 2, they're going to be out for that race when you cut them.
There you go. Well said. When do contracts lock in? After qualifying, just before the race? Again, depends on the league, but let's talk about IndyCar and NASCAR, which both lock at the start of the race. So again, there will be that countdown timer that you see on your My Team screen, I think on the league screen as well, that tells you when lockdown is going to happen. And that is when any open contract or open position on your team that you've filled with a driver, their contract will officially start at the first lockdown of whenever you've added them to your team. It is slightly before the race. It's not always perfectly at the green flag. It's usually, sometimes it's like 10 minutes early, but it's whatever official start time we get from the leagues or some of the data providers. So we do give a countdown. We also have 24, 4, and 1 hour notifications that go out if your lineup is empty, so that you don't forget. If you do not have push notifications on, turn them on. We see a direct correlation between people who are not at the top of their leagues and people that don't have push notifications on, because inevitably, especially in something like NASCAR where there's 36 events a year, you are going to forget. You're going to make a mistake and you're going to forget one day. Turn your push notifications on if you don't have them on. Otherwise, you're not going to win your league. There's almost a 0% chance that you won't. The correlation is that high.
Throughout the season, there are going to be enough bad things that happen to you that are out of your control that happen on the track. So don't shoot yourself in the foot at any point.
Samuel, if you sign a driver to a multi-race contract, does their updated value repopulate each week or only at the end? Yes, it updates after every single race. And depending on how fast we get data from our data provider, sometimes it's within 30 minutes. Sometimes it's usually within an hour. Fantasy points are updated in real time. as the race occurs. So you'll see your My Team screen and your results screen updating with points in real time. Later this year, we will have hopefully have real time leaderboards. But the salaries themselves will not update until final scoring is complete, and it's usually an hour.
And I'll give a caveat here. So when final scoring runs, if there's a post-race penalty that changes the outcome of the race, we do rescore the race and reassign the points and salary changes. So once the race is over, the app is still in lockdown for 24 more hours. During that period, if a penalty happens and the race results change, we do account for that. We do rescore it before lockdown lifts. And if the penalty is still ongoing, we may even extend lockdown to make sure we have the most accurate race results before we lift lockdown.
Next question. Oh, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, and if you're wondering when that value ends up in your bank as the values change, the contract value only ends up in your bank once the contract ends. So whether you release the driver or whether the contract naturally expires, that's when the money actually ends up in the bank and is spendable by you again.
Yep. And Antonino, why is Kimi Antonelli's price so high?
It is,
Antonio, good question. So why is Antonelli's price so high? Well, we have to slot him somewhere, and he drives a Mercedes, and the Mercedes is a pretty good car. So like there is some art to these driver rankings that we came up with, like because we decided so. Like we decided that was the best order of the drivers.
Yeah.
And
But-
somebody asking, Zach's asking a question along this similar line: how do improvement points work for rookies who don't have an 8 race average?
Very
We
good
make them up.
question.
So that's the short version. So what we did is we ranked all of the drivers for IndyCar, for NASCAR, for F1, and each of those leagues, so each of those sports rather, and the improvement. So the improvement points are going to be based on those rankings until we have the 8 race history for IndyCar and F1. So like once St. Petersburg happens, like thermal is going to be your St. Petersburg finish plus 7 times as though they finished where we ranked them to begin with. And that'll just fill out as we get more races. For NASCAR, once we get past the 5th race, it'll be based on where they are in the championship, which we felt was a little bit more appropriate for that series just because of the track diversity there and the volatile nature of some of those tracks.
Yeah, and to both Antonio and Zach, I promise you guys, we did not just pull these numbers out of a hat. There were countless hours and meetings and debate and discussion
simulations
to make sure that
sure
that we're hopefully as accurate as possible. But I'm sure we'll be wrong on some of them.
And to be clear, we've assigned everybody a starting average, like whether they were racing last year or not, just because there's been so much upheaval in all the different sports this past off season. Really interesting times to be a race fan.
Mm-hmm. Down to only 2 questions. If anyone's got questions, start getting them in. Jameson, if a driver on if my driver's on a contract but doesn't participate, is injured or does not qualify, can we replace them? Do we have to pay the fee to drop them? It's almost like these people are setting these questions up. Those are great
Good
questions.
question. Okay.
William, do you want to take that one?
Me?
Yeah, substitutions.
Okay.
I think he's asking how does substitutions and
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with the injury scenario. So if it's a short-term situation, they're going to miss a race or two. Whoever fills in for that driver, we substitute them in. You don't have to do anything with the contract. The replacement driver will score points just as though they were the original driver. And we saw that happen a few times last year between F1 and NASCAR, where somebody was filling in 1 week, and so they scored the points. If the reports were the driver was going to be out for an extended period, or if they lost their seat on a permanent basis just because the team fired them or something, or maybe they left to join the circus, their contract will be terminated and we refund you the money, and then you're free to sign any other driver. Whoever ends up driving that car on a permanent basis, we put them in as though they're a brand new driver. We give them a rank, we give them a value independently of the past, and you're free to sign that driver as well. That's the injury scenario. If somebody fails to qualify for a race, so this is a thing at the Indy 500, Like there's probably going to be more than 33 entries, and only 33 of them get in. There's no guaranteed spots. In that case, if the driver doesn't qualify, they're not going to score any points. The good news is there is a week between bump day and the race, and we'll all know who that odd driver out is. And I would suggest dropping them if you have them on your roster, or just not signing them. And yeah, if they were on your roster, you would have to pay the fee. So slight
Situation
risk
where
there.
the fee would definitely be worth it. 100% pay the drop
Yes.
fee if the driver
Pay the
is not
drop fee
going
if
to
they're
race.
scoring 0. If a driver doesn't start, like if the car as a whole does not start for any reason, that's going to be 0 points as well. If they're disqualified for whatever reason, that's going to be 0 points for that session. So I hope that answers the question.
If it doesn't, you can ask another one, Jameson. Zach Bowers, is there a free version of this for IndyCar? Zach, if you are still on this chat, I would love to have you clarify exactly what you mean by that. We said
These
earlier,
leagues are free. You get the
the
Grid
in-
Rival app and download that. The fantasy leagues are totally free to play.
fantasy leagues are free to play everywhere in the world. We have a game called Picks, which is a daily fantasy parlay game that is paid entry and has cash prizes and is available only in 25 states. So you may be referring to that. If there's some confusion, please let us know in the chat and we can help you get headed in the right direction. But make sure when you get in the app, you are tapping the leagues tab on the bottom navigation. The Boys Racing says Ed Carpenter likes to change drivers for oval and road course. If this happens, does the driver for that race act as your pick for that race? Hopefully that makes
So
sense.
if I think we would go on a case by case basis. I think if somebody decides to play musical chairs between ovals and road courses, we probably go the substitution route, but don't hold us to that. I know the history with that Carpenter Racing. I see Rossi running all 17 races this year. I see Rasmussen running all 17 races this year. I think we're past that era in the IndyCar series. Like that was a much more common thing to do, especially when there used to be more high-speed ovals on the schedule. But yeah, I don't anticipate that happening, and I may end up eating those words. Uh,
Mhm.
but yeah, we would probably apply the substitution rules in that case. But we'll see. Like I said, I don't think it's going to come to that.
Marcus Dunn, I have no idea what you're talking about in terms of advertisements, but happy to answer any questions if you have them. Ali says, does the contract fee vary depending on the remaining time? It does not. That is by the way, we have a feature request board at feedback.gridrival.com. That is one I have seen on there. I've seen somebody request that they think the um, early release penalty should be scalable, meaning, if you release someone right away, it's more expensive. If there's only one event left or something like that, it should be less expensive. That's something that you would love to see in the app. Go to feedback.gridrival.com and vote on that. Or submit new ideas if you have them. Jamie B, for earning the max points, is it ever a good idea to have the top IndyCar drivers, or is going with mid-pack racers more of a way to go? That is a great question. That is a loaded question.
It's a couple of things.
It is a couple of things.
It's a couple of things. Okay, so I'll unpack this and let anyone else chime in on this. So let's take Alex Palou, for example, right? Top ranked driver on the game right now, $30 million contract value. Is it a good idea? We're starting the season. Is it a good idea to have Alex Palou on your team for St. Petersburg? My answer is flat out no. So the reason is because there's only downside. Like if Alex Palou does not finish first, he's going to lose value. Okay. And the early part of the game, you want to maximize your value increase. And over time, the points will keep building. Whereas if you're, but you are looking to have who you would consider to be a podium contender on your lineup, right? So if you're looking at the top 5 drivers, top 6 drivers to include Herta for IndyCar, you want to say, okay, or throw Pato in there, top 7 drivers, right? You don't want to just be stacking mid-pack drivers and back of field drivers to kind of hope that they have an outsized result. And then that nets a ton of bonus points and rockets you straight to the top. we kind of call them blue chip drivers when we talk about them on our streams. You want to have a podium contender on your team, then you want to have a couple mid packers and that are talent driver eligible or right around there, and then a couple people in the back of the field. That will give you a pretty consistent result. Anyone else have feedback on that?
Yeah, the trick to this game is finding the drivers that are underpriced and signing them and reaping the rewards when they have good results.
Yep.
You'll gain value and you'll gain a lot of points as well.
Yep, and there is no magic formula. Some weeks having the top driver is going to be a great thing. Some weeks they'll DNF and it will ruin your lineup. It's hindsight's always going to be 2020, but yeah, from a week in week out basis, there's no perfect strategy. But we will be talking about what we think, and we're not always right, but we try.
Yeah, actually, I could expand on this one more just because we don't have that many more questions right now. Anyway, this is my personal take. I'm not going to say my accolades of where I've finished in the game in previous seasons, but pretty darn high in terms of the global leaderboard. In my opinion, it doesn't matter if you play this game like checkers or chess, you're going to get wrecked. And that's going to happen to every player in your league. It doesn't matter if someone's using spreadsheets, if someone's purely guessing, if someone's a casual fan, if someone's a diehard fan. The best way to play the game is just to predict the race finish position and build that team next to out of your budget, right? You don't really have to worry about contract length and bonus points a ton if you're really good at predicting the race finish positions just from your own kind of motorsports intuition and ability to think about the future. So things like contract lengths, right? You could pay a fee to break a contract length. So I don't stress a ton about the contract length because if I'm playing the game well, predicting the race finish positions, my team's going to grow in value and I'm going to score a lot of points. So I'm going to have the money to pay that contract break free. So I don't let that ruin my day. It's part of the fun of the game is how dynamic it is that sometimes you're flush and sometimes you're bust. And that's just how it is. So I hope that also clears up some of this strategy stuff.
If we knew who was going to finish where every single week, we wouldn't be doing this show. We'd be on an island somewhere.
Great question from Bexonius. Please, can you explain improvement index? How do you rate it? What is the reference data for it?
Sure.
How about I explain it and you can answer that second part?
You sure?
No, go for it. Go. I'll let you take it. I'll let you take it.
Go
for it.
Okay, me? Okay, so improvement index. So that is simply the number that the improvement points are based on. So for F1 and IndyCar, that's going to be eventually the 8-race average finish. For now, since we haven't had 8 races, we're padding it with our initial rankings. The improvement index that you see now, that's how we rank the driver to begin with. And you'll score improvement points if you do better than that number as far as your finish position goes. For NASCAR improvement index, right now it's based on the rankings. 3 weeks from now, it's going to be based on the car's position in the Owners' Championship. So that's how that number will move. F1 and IndyCar, as we start to get race finishes, those numbers are going to move just because that's going to be the 8-race average working its way in. And so I think I've just explained the reference data and what it's there for. So right now, initial rankings, as the season goes on, based on the driver's championship position or average finish, depending on the sport. And that dictates how you score your improvement points.
And while we're on the topic, because that is the last current question that we have, if anybody has any others, now is the time to get them in. But I think it's might be valuable to spend a minute on improvement points specifically and kind of why we have them and why we came up with them.
Yeah.
And the reason is especially in leagues like of the 3 that we have in our league game, which are Formula One, IndyCar, and NASCAR, I think most people would probably agree Formula One's the most predictable. And improvement points really work to reward mid pack and kind of back marker drivers when they have a really outstanding performance. To the comment I made earlier about Alex Palou finishing first versus a much lower ranked driver having a podium. If we take an example in Formula One, a new driver who's in one of the worst cars finishing in sixth place and having like a really, really outstanding race is probably a bigger achievement than somebody like Max Verstappen finishing in first in the best car with the most experience, et cetera, et cetera. So improvement points work to reward a driver for finishing above average. And the way that we do that, it's a little bit different in some of the series, but generally speaking, we track their finish position average. And to the degree that they finish above that, how far above that they finish, they're awarded improvement points. In IndyCar, we do something a little bit different. William, I think you addressed that, but
Yeah, I've explained how the points are computed, but yes, like Ross said, uh, Max Verstappen winning a race, that's expected. An Alpine finishing on the podium, that's not expected. So you reward those guys when they have a massive result.
Yeah, we
Or
had some.
IndyCar, like take for example Connor Daly at Milwaukee last year. He got in a car that was like 20th in the standings, and he stuck it on the podium, and that's a massive result for him and for that team. So we reward that more than say Penske or Chip Ganassi driver who's expected to finish on the podium most weeks.
Yeah, there was some Lance Stroll love in the chat earlier, which doesn't sound real, but it is. We attract some of the I'd say fan clubs for some of the poorer drivers down the grid. But yeah, like when Lance Stroll finishes on the podium in Australia, he's going to score a ton of points. You heard it
That's
here
hot
first.
take.
he will have an outrageous number of fantasy points. That is correct. That's it for questions. We have nothing else coming in. So, any first of all, if there is any lingering questions, make sure and get them in now. But while we're waiting, do you guys have any closing thoughts? Any nuggets of wisdom that you want to share? Ryan is one of the highest ranked NASCAR fantasy players on Grid Rival, legitimately, right? Where he's not going into the database and entering any. There's no shady stuff going on. So,
Not this season. Last season, yeah. This season, I went 0 for 6 on drivers finishing in Daytona, which was a rough start. Atlanta was a little better, but I'm feeling good. We're gonna bounce back at Coda here. But yeah, if strategy advice, we are doing a show tomorrow to preview St. Petersburg for IndyCar. So tune into that if you're looking for lineup advice. We're not always right, but I think we do pretty well if you look back at our record during the F1 season last year.
That's at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific tomorrow after that first practice session. So we'll have seen cars on track, and we'll have a lot of opinions to offer based on that whole hour or however long it is worth of data.
Mhm.
And also jump in the paddock or the Discord. I'm always down to talk some NASCAR strategy for Coda coming up here. So jump on in there, and we're always there answering questions and just having a good time.
Yeah. And if you found this session helpful, tell your league mates and post about it in the paddock for F1, NASCAR, IndyCar, whichever one you want. Question came in. I arrived late. Were these sessions recorded and available to review? Yes. So the session today, yesterday, and the day before are all recorded, and recommend you watch them all if you have the time. Just click on our YouTube account, click the live tab, and then they'll all be in the live tab there. Then while you're there, subscribe and turn the notification bell on, because then when we do future live shows, you'll get a YouTube notification that you could click and it'll open it right up.
And the last thing I will say before we leave is this game is all about community and camaraderie, right? When we created it, it was all about how do we make motorsports more fun. I was sick of seeing my football loving friends every year doing fantasy football and all the engagement that it created and all the fun they were having. And so we really wanted something that would help bring the community together. So the best way to experience this product, and honestly any season-long fantasy product, in my personal opinion, is with a small group of friends. The leagues, when we hear from users, the people that are having the most fun are in leagues of 3 to 10 people, with close friends competing against each other over the course of the season. So if by chance you've come to this app and you're in one of these big leagues with thousands of people, great, it'll still be fun. But we encourage everybody to either start one of their own and invite some of the people love racing to experiencing at that level. So With that, we are out of questions. We will give everybody 10 minutes of their day back. We appreciate you all joining and are excited to have all of you new players on the application. And if it's not abundantly clear, based off of the free calls we've done this week and all the support we give, we are very available. Reach out to us at support@gridrival.com. We're here to answer questions and help ensure that you have a successful new experience on our product. So thank you all very much and have a great weekend. All right, we're done.